All right, so the last part of this kind of introduction is thinking about a historical perspective. So, over time, there have been four stages of thought concerning the environment. One is utilitarian resource conservation. So, the basic idea being how can we make sure we have access to timber and other resources into the future? Some others later on were interested more in the moral and aesthetic of nature preservation. So, people that were concerned um, about destroying things that were there before they came, and also thinking about the artistic quality of many of these natural features and making sure they're preserved for people in the future. After that became a concern about health and ecological damage. Some of the pollution during some times in the past was so bad that it really did impact people's health. The air quality was so bad it made people sick, and the water quality was really bad and it made people sick. So that's been a big concern. And then, kind of the most recent is kind of global environmental citizenship. As we realize that many of these systems are connected and that what we do here in the United States might affect people in other parts of the world, we want to think about being a good environmental citizen and making sure we're doing our part for many of these global issues. I also want to point out that these stages are not mutually exclusive and parts of each persist today in the environmental movement. So there are still important ideas from all of these that are still in place. So I want to talk about a few famous conservation biologists or environmentalists in the United States. One is Gifford Pinchot. He was the first chief of the U.S. Forest Service. He coined the term conservation ethic, and he did a lot for sustainable forestry, but he was really concerned about being able to use the resources, make sure we have timber available to us in the future. So very utilitarian perspective, very anthropocentric, meaning that not really worried about the ecosystems themselves, so you worried about what's available for people. And this is his quote here: the greatest good of the greatest number for the longest time. So he wants to have resources, the most resources available for the greatest number of people for the longest time. So it's kind of a sustainable use idea. A few other ones came around a similar time. You may have heard of some of these people. Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau often come up in American literature classes. They were important writers of the Transcendentalist movement in New England. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote a lot of poetry. Henry David Thoreau is most well known for writing Walden, which was a book about him staying in a cabin by himself in nature, and what he saw there. And then finally, John Muir was famous for going on these long romantic walks through Yosemite, and was a founding member of the Sierra Club, and a big reason that Yosemite National Park became protected. These people were interested in the spiritual aspects of nature and of preserving nature for nature's own sake and for the beauty of it. So here we can see nature has uses other than human economic gain, and they talk about the need of people for wilderness and for being exposed to nature. Very romantic ideas. Oh, and I will point out that this is Theodore Roosevelt next to John Muir on this mountain. Another important conservation biologist is Aldo Leopold. He is also known as the father of wildlife biology. He wrote one of the original texts that was used as textbook for training new wildlife biologists. He wrote a really important book called A Sand County Almanac that was published in 1949. And in it, he has a particular chapter on the land ethic. And it recognizes the complexity, interconnectedness, including humans, and dynamic aspects of nature itself. And so here's a quote from his book. "We abuse land because we see it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect." So he didn't say that you shouldn't touch nature. You should use it responsibly, but not just see it as something for us to use. See it as something that we should preserve for the future for itself, but also so we could use it. So he was an avid hunter and fisherman, but he also restored some land that he owned and worked very hard to do that. Rachel Carson is probably one of the most famous environmentalists. She is most well known for writing the book Silent Spring, which was published in 1962. And the idea of Silent Spring was that there were so many chemicals that we were manufacturing and releasing into the environment, things like DDT, but other chemicals as well, that were harmful to wildlife and to birds especially. So the idea of a silent spring was that these chemicals were killing off our birds, and that in the spring we weren't going to have the nice songbirds that we get to listen to and see at our bird feeders. So that's where the title of that book comes from. But it is one of the great works of literature in the environmental literature category. And it motivated the creation of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and was big reasons that DDT was banned in the United States. And so she started kind of, not like by herself, but what she did in her writing started the environmentalist movement, and people being concerned about the effects of pollution on human health, but also to wildlife. Incidentally, her impact was not as large as it might have been, except that she got cancer and died at a relatively young age, in her 50s. A more recent figure is Michael Soule. He was the co-founder of the Society for Conservation Biology, which is an academic society of professional conservation biologists. And he died recently, but he wrote a lot of the foundational works about conservation biology, and put that it was a crisis discipline. So this idea that we have all these species that are in trouble, and we have to figure out how to prioritize with our limited resources to make sure we can save as many of them as possible. It is also important to realize that the preservation of natural resources, ecosystem management, and sustainable development are also major themes in conservation biology. So I cover these in BISC and INSC 212. And sustainable development is development that best meets the present and future human needs without damaging the environment and biodiversity. So some of these other fields are very closely related to environmental science, but we're going to focus on the environment part and the solutions to some of these environmental problems that we're currently facing. So this is the end of the kind of introduction to environmental science, and this covers the material in chapter 1. So if you have any questions, again, don't forget you can just email me, or you can come by office hours and I'll be happy to talk to you about them.